We are now streaming.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Detweiler. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the Boone County Schools, and tonight this is the second meeting of our district calendar committee. So committee, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to call this meeting to order. It is I think I have my Apple phone says 5:31 p.m. I think that Shauna has sent to each of you, or actually it is in the calendar invite, a copy of the minutes from the last meeting. If you could all open that up, if you haven't taken a look, and take a few minutes just to review it quickly, we can see if we need to make any changes to that. Does anybody see anything on the minutes that needs to be changed at this time? Okay, we don't have any formal motions or anything, but we'll accept those minutes. And if anybody later sees anything that needs to be changed, just let us know and we can make sure it gets changed. So thank you for taking a look. The first item I have that we need to discuss, early release dates. If you remember from the last meeting, the principals, the elementary principals in particular, had requested that we seriously consider adding early release dates to the calendar. It is something that they have been interested in for, I think, the last couple of years. What that would provide, it would provide our teachers, 4 of those throughout the year would provide our teachers an opportunity to PLC numerous times throughout the year as needed, and to provide some professional learning during the school day. My discussion with Mr. Turner, we had a discussion and Mr. McCarter was there as well. And at this time, Mr. Turner is asking us not to consider it for this coming year. There has been so many changes this school year and so many other hot topics, I'll just say it like that, that this might be just one more that we probably are not in a position to really take on at this time. So, I would open conversation for that. If you wanted to have some more conversation, we can. The one thing that I will promise to you as the committee chair, I'll do a better job. I think what I want to do is set a meeting for summer. So you all would receive a calendar invite for a date in the summer so we can get started with that conversation much earlier. I know that that was a frustration of the principals that they expressed to me that, we need to be starting this conversation much earlier, and that's on me, so we can do that. Would anybody like to have some conversation about that? Principals, did you want to comment at all? Okay. Okay, I'm
Dr. Detweiler, I will mention, from my perspective, I think the only concern that I had, and if we're looking at the year after next or whenever this will come up again, my concern was with regards to lost instruction time. So yes. I know, especially with the mention of NTI rather than snow days, and seeing how that transition didn't really happen smoothly thus far. My concern is that when we combine that with early dismissal, I'm worried about lost instruction time. So I just don't want to chip away when we know we're kind of at a crux where we're really going to need to be making up some ground. So just if we can put that on a parking lot somewhere so we can mix that up when we get to that discussion in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Brown. That is definitely a consideration. And that loss of instruction time is going to come up in our next topic as well. So thank you for mentioning that. Any other comments? Okay, Mr. Ford, if you wouldn't mind putting in front of us the calendar that we are considering recommending to the board this evening, I wanted to point out a couple of things that, or at least one thing that we should discuss. Are you able to share that? Is that working? There you go. Thank you, sir. So if you take a look at this calendar, the last time we talked about having 4 professional development days at the front of the school year, very similar to what we did this past school year. What this does do, however, and we should discuss this, is, and Mike, Mr. Ford, please correct me if I'm wrong, it takes 175 instructional days and we put it down to 172 instructional days. I would say, as the Chief Academic Officer, I am comfortable with that, and this is the reason. I really believe that in order for us to be successful with our students, we have to invest in our human capital. We have to invest in time for our teachers to do the learning and the planning that they need, rather than expecting them to do it after school hours or during the summer. Especially coming off a year like this, I would anticipate there being a need for this kind of 4 days of professional development up front. We call it professional development, but it may be PLC. It may be looking at student data, looking at where students ended the year academically so that we can appropriately group them and provide them with the instruction that they need moving forward. And actually, Dr. Brown, I'm going to ask you if you could repeat something that you said in our earlier meeting at the task force meeting. You mentioned that the vaccinations for pediatric vaccinations could be delayed, maybe not come as early as possible. I think that's also plays into this, maybe this need for this PD. Could you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been tracking, just because I'm a scientist and I'm a nerd and I'm a mom, is that when we look at the excitement around the adult vaccinations, while those are incredibly promising, the concern here is that pediatric vaccination trials have literally just begun in the last month. And those are apparently being very, very slow to fill. I'm sure there's a great deal of hesitancy with regard to many parents. So most of the Journal of American Medical Association recently had an estimated where they think it could be 2022 before we anticipate any sort of a pediatric vaccine. So I think looking forward to how we deliver instruction and how we best deliver instruction, as much, I think in the last meeting, I said it would make me the least popular person in the room. It behooves us to at least think about what instruction might look like in the fall and whether or not this is going to just disappear by then. While we may have our older adult populations less susceptible based on which vaccine they get and how that looks long term, and right now some of those data are kind of all over the place, we will still have our pediatric students who are, as we know, really great vectors for disease. So I think looking forward, looking at how we can best provide instruction, how we can catch kids up when we still may have a model that does not look like we traditionally think school looks.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And for me, that just speaks volumes to possibly the need for this kind of 4 days for the teachers up front, to really be able to adjust to where we are with the pandemic at that point. It was very valuable. I think I'll ask Jenny, if you wouldn't mind, Mrs. Watson, talking a little bit about the teacher feedback you got from last school year regarding the PDs that we had at the beginning of the school year. Very valuable for the teachers.
Yes, I'll say, while there's never enough, it was just an opportunity that for teachers will tell you that they are tighter aligned as a professional learning community than they ever have been, because they've had to rely on each other. So that all started when we were, at the beginning of the year with those days. I think, and Mary Wilson could probably attest to this too, the other feedback that we got is because those days were somewhat spread out, it was an overload. So teachers did feel like they could grapple with new information, process it, try it, explore it. Plus, they were treated as professionals. They felt like they were ready to welcome kids and families back in any environment. So overall, overwhelmingly positive.
Thank you. So I'll just open this up to discussion. I want to make sure that we have a full discussion on, one, the need for it, and also, are we able to justify and make a case for why we would exchange 3 instructional days essentially for 3 professional learning days or professional development days for the teachers. So I'll open it up to discussion.
Dr. Delweiler?
Yes, sir.
If I may, from a technical perspective, just to maybe ease some anxiety for someone who might be thinking about some of the changes we've made in the calendar. I mentioned in our first meeting, the state requires that we have 170 instructional days. So even though traditionally we have started the year with 175, we are still exceeding the state minimum requirement by 2 days. And because our instructional day is 6 hours and 15 minutes rather than the state minimum requirement of 6 hours, we exceed the 1,062 hours by almost 15 hours, going to 172 days at 6 hours and 15 minutes per day. So I very much appreciate and respect what you said at the very onset of the meeting, and that is the investment in our human capital and the need to provide that opportunity to our administrative and teaching staff, classified staff, to gain valuable insight and professional development going into another year that, like Ms. Watson said, may begin in a state of pandemic requirements like we did this year. So I hope that just eases the mind of everyone that if we do go with these 4 days additional, we increase the number of PD, P, and flex days to 9 from the traditional 6, but we're not doing it at the hostage of our children. We're still meeting and exceeding state requirements both in days and hours for instructional time. So I just wanted to share that with everyone moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mrs. Wilson, would you like to say anything on behalf of the teachers?
No, I know I've shared with you a couple of years ago that when we had the PD, and this was always one of my favorite PDs, when we went to Ryle and teachers were able to choose, that was one of the best, most meaningful days. And this is very similar to that, in which teachers can select and choose what they want to. It's not cookie cutter for everybody. We're not all doing the same thing. So this definitely benefits the teachers in the long run in choosing what applies to them in the classroom or what they need professionally to be successful for the next year. So.
Great. And Mr. Bufano, this would also apply to classified staff, paras, et cetera, providing them with, especially the paras, providing them with the professional development they need to be successful students as well. Did you have any questions or anything you wanted to comment on?
No, I was going to point that out. It would benefit the paras because they always complain that they're trying to squeeze so much in the beginning, and this does give them some additional time to get their stuff together. So it works out well for them too.
Okay, thank you. Principals, do you have any comments, anything that you wanted to add or questions and anything at all?
I just had a question. So the 4 PD days at the beginning, would those be all district led or will there be some school individuality? Because we all have different needs in regards to things that go on in the building.
Right, that's a great question. Thank you. My discussion with Mr. Turner is we would divide it up, that, a couple of those, definitely 2 of those at least would be for the individual building needs. The other 2 probably would be district led, but also have a lot of flexibility, as Mary was describing. I know Jenny is working hard to see that happens. A lot of flexibility with teachers to be able to choose, and parents to be able to choose what they need for themselves. That's something we would have to work with probably the T&L principals to make sure that they feel comfortable that we are providing the individual schools what they need as individuals. It's a good question.
Can we put some teachers on that committee too, so that they have some input in what they need and want? Absolutely,
Bobby. Thank you.
If we know we have the days, that does give us an opportunity to plan that way. Because if this calendar is set, Bobby, to your point, that could almost be like a little ad hoc committee that's developing the professional learning for those days. I like the menu idea, like what we kind of, gave some options, but, just say, here's kind of some district requirements, here's some suggestions. And then by X number of days, just if you could have, those requirements finished, that would be great. But I would love teacher voice on that committee to help us figure out what it is teachers need. Somebody from all levels.
I apologize for putting people on the spot. I just want to make sure that we do have a full discussion so that we don't have any problems later on. So I'm going to ask, Mr. Fryman and Dr. Brown, you represent the Board of Education. And so the next step for everybody is that we will recommend to the board that they consider this calendar. So it'll be a first reading next Thursday. Should you guys move forward, should the committee move forward and recommend it? Do the 2 of you foresee any problems or anything that we should address moving in that direction?
I don't foresee any problems based upon Dr. Detweiler, what you've provided along with Mr. Ford and the committee that you've put forth in front of us right now, unless Dr. Brown has other comments. One thing that I did want to look back on, and I know we talked a little bit about this at our last meeting in regards to the calendar itself. I know a lot of things are set as they normally are on an annual basis based upon where spring break and everything's at. Are there other activities within the county or within the region that would conflict when we have certain days off or certain activities that happen in school versus what's happening within the community itself?
It's a good question. I'm gonna defer that to Ms. Grimm and Mr. Ford, because they, we've said before, they kind of live this calendar. I know that you guys work hard to avoid things like that. What are some of the dates that we've tried to work around so that this calendar works with the community?
Mr. Fryman, one thing that we look at in February is President's Day. Ms. Grimm in our last meeting commented about how we had moved that professional day in February to the Monday after Super Bowl on a trial basis several years ago.
Right.
And we actually got very good feedback from the community to move that P-Day back to President's Day because of when so many of our families work or don't work, with that President's Day being constituted as a holiday. So that's input that we received from the community that has pretty well regulated the calendar to keep that P-Day on President's Day. In April, taking into consideration where Good Friday falls, where Easter Sunday falls, et cetera. That's always been taken into consideration. Of course, state law, federal law as well, dictates that in January, we must take Dr. Martin Luther King Day off. And I know I'm kind of jumping around, but I'm just, as I look at the calendar, remember my thoughts.
Mike, the other one's the election days.
Yes, whether or not we have a federal election in November or we have to take that day in May for a primary, that's directed to us by state law because our schools are used as polling sites. So that's taken into consideration. And then the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, that day was taken into consideration and added as a day off several years ago in conversation between the district and our BCEA and BCCEA and the community. We did a 2-year attendance study on that Tuesday before Thanksgiving to see what the impact would be. And we found that the impact was minimal. So in working with our 2 unions and the community, that day was given as a day off, and Thanksgiving became a 3-day break instead of just a 2-day break. I share that history with you, Mr. Fryman, to let both you and Ms. Brown be aware that this calendar that we have in front of you, after we get beyond the discussion of the 4 PD days at the onset of the calendar, has become a structured calendar that has pretty well rolled over year after year after year because of the great amount of communication and work that's been done between the district, our 2 unions, and the community. And we've listened, we've talked, we've shared ideas. Like Dr. Detweiler said, Bobby and I have been doing this together for 15 years. This is our 16th year doing this together. And we know pretty much how a calendar is going to look because of the work that's been done extensively over the last 16 years. So I hope that answers your question, that there has been a great deal of discussion, consideration, care taken into concerns from all stakeholders to develop our district calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I appreciate the information and what you've dedicated along with Bobby and others on for what I would consider a very long time on why this calendar is set up the way it is. And, you know, regardless if anybody within the community, we have questions on it, you guys have thought this through, you know, for many, many hours. So I appreciate everything you've done on it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fryman. Dr. Brown, did you have any comments?
No, I think had we gone ahead with the early dismissal and the moving PD, where we would potentially be impacting, you know, 4 half days and 3 full days, that would have given me a little hesitancy. But you know, if we're not going to do that, I don't have any qualms, and I don't anticipate with the discussions that I've had that anyone else would either.
Okay, thank you. How about our parents and our community members? We really appreciate you being with us through this process. Do you have any questions or comments about really anything in the calendar at this point?
No, I think that, you know, it's important as a parent to understand and recognize what the teachers are doing and what they need to do to be successful in the classroom. If they don't have a good frame of mind, I think, you know, I forgot who said it about building into the teachers and the staff is really, really important in order to get them to be confident and successful in the classroom in order to teach. So, you know, I'm going to rely on the teachers and the administration here to represent them, to say if this is something that the schools need, and that's what we should do.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Webb. Mr. Claxton, we really appreciate you being here as the president of our Education Foundation. Did you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't think so. At this time, it's obvious you guys have put a lot of thought into this, and you have a lot, all of you have a lot on your plate these days. So I just want to say, I think you're all to be commended for everything you're doing. So thank you as a community member.
Thank you very much. Okay, I just really have one other question, because I remember the conversation, and maybe Bobby, I'll direct this to you. There was some discussion about where to put opening day. Are we all happy with where the opening day is on here? There was some discussion whether or not opening day, actually, Mr. Ford, maybe you were the traditionalist who thought maybe you might want to consider putting it at the beginning.
It was Bobby, and I was going to ask Bobby, Mary, and our principals. I'm a traditionalist. For the calendar report that is required to be submitted to the Department of Education, I always want I want in my mind everything to be clean before we even work towards those reports. How would Mary and Bobby and our principals feel about flipping August 17th to a PD day and August 9th to our opening day? Like I said, I'm a traditionalist, and I think opening day should be the first day of the calendar. I don't want to have to anticipate answering any questions to the Department of Education. So would anyone have any issues if we flipped August 9 and August 17th? It really doesn't do anything to change the days. We still have, those would be the only two that would be impacted. So I wanted to get the thoughts of those individuals, if it would be okay with them. Like I said, I'm just looking ahead to a state report that has to be submitted to the Department of Education. I want it to be clean. I don't want to have to explain it.
Here's the only reason that I put it there. And it was because that day is in our contract that says that half of it can be used by the district and half of it is basically working in your room and getting your room ready for the year. And the part that traditionally we've done for the half day is, you know, attendance and how we're going to do it, where we talk about all the papers that we have to pass out. And that's just that half day right before the kids come in that we get all of that information. Having those other PD days and being able to move it, I don't know that it matters, as long as it doesn't matter in that the contract says that half of that day, half of opening day has to be used for teachers to work in their rooms or do their own thing, and half of it can be used by the district.
I think we've traditionally kept it there to give a break in between the Monday PD day and the Wednesday first day of school. So, you know, like as a teacher, I would prefer to have that day where it's at now instead of move it around.
Mary, if I may ask for clarification, what do you mean where it's at now? Like,
it's always traditionally been there on that Tuesday. Isn't that where we've always had it?
I think I'm not sure, but remind me, I think maybe we did have the opening day before the PD days. For example, having
So we
the
had it Monday,
superintendent-
Tuesday?
Yeah, one of the
Okay.
benefits was having the superintendent be able to address everybody in the district. At one time, we were able to do that via Skype or however we did it. But it's kind of set the tone for the district.
Right.
I personally don't have a preference. I do hear what you're saying, Mike. It would be not great if for some reason we were questioned by the state. That is a good reason to consider moving it to the very beginning, to that Monday, the 9th. Mr. Dittmer, what do you think as a teacher?
Well, I mean, I just think it has a little bit of a logic that you're working before right now. We're going to work before we actually have opening day. Like, it's kind of like we've already worked 4 or 5 days. Okay, it's opening day. Just kind of logically like that. But I do get where that half day in the afternoon, when teachers are really, that's when it gets down to the really getting things like even just copies made and things like that done for the first day of school stuff. But, if there's flexibility in what is done with the PD and things, I don't see if it would matter. It just depends. Because some principals are more flexible about that than others. So that would be my concern.
Principals, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you, Ryan.
In this team camp, I don't know that it really matters whether it's on the 9th or the 17th. I definitely see, if you put enough flexibility in there. I know in my building, I do give them enough flexibility to do what they need to do to be ready, because we usually throw an open house in there somewhere. So their rooms are already ready to go anyway. It's not like that's what they're doing the day before kids arrive. They've already done that. They're just kind of shoring things up at the end. So I think just a big piece would fall into whether there's enough flexibility to give teachers what the time that they need. And I can't speak for every principal, but I would say the majority of us already do that to make sure that teachers have the time they need.
Mr. Wilson, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Kim. It really doesn't matter. I do see the advantage of it right before the first day of kids, just so teachers across the district have that time. But yeah, I think if there's enough flexibility there across all schools, that teachers could be ready for the first day of school if we move the opening day to the 9th.
What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that as long as there's the flexibility and that, thank you, Mr. Wilson, as long as there's flexibility and as long as we preserve that time in the afternoon for the teachers to do what they need to do to be ready, moving it would not be a problem. I think I would request that we move it to the 9th, just because I don't want to run into any future problems that we don't foresee right now with the state coming back and having questions about the calendar. Also, I do kind of agree with what Ryan Dimmer said too, that there's a mindset there, getting started from the very beginning. This is opening day and then we move forward. Are there any objections to that?
I just think, just one suggestion, and I don't know if Mr. Ford can do it for us, but when we take the calendar now and open up a voting window for it, that we have the rationale provided from him with the reasons behind why, with the state reporting, explaining why we just moved, that it's going to be, up to the discretion, I guess, of the principals, whatever they do that one day, so that the teachers have enough flexibility.
Yeah,
Mary, you know me, Mary, you tell me what you need and I'll put it in writing for you. We've always worked well together and I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Clarify what you need, you'll have it.
Okay.
Okay, great. Let's plan to do that then, if that is all right with everyone. Any other comments at all about the calendar? Anything we need to discuss before we talk about next steps? I think I told you the last time I'm working on my wait time. Okay. So let me just review again what the next steps are. The next steps are next Thursday, this will be on the board agenda as a first reading for the board. The board will have opportunities to ask questions at that point. assuming that the board is okay with moving forward, then this calendar would be presented to the BCEA for ratification. Is that correct, Mary?
I thought we can do it all at the same time.
Okay.
You just have to tell me when you want me to vote on it. I have to have it, like say we were going to have the voting window next week, I would have to have everything in by tomorrow, but I'd have to make sure the voting window was open. So if you want the board to look at it first, that would mean I could not have voting until we came back from Christmas break, which puts us at the second board meeting already.
So let's do it all at the same time. That makes sense. Let's go ahead.
Okay,
You're okay
so
with that?
I can if this is what the draft is going to be, I don't know if I can get the window. I won't know until tomorrow if I can get the window next week or the last week before Christmas break. So if I can get the last week of Christmas break, as long as I had everything by next Wednesday, that'll work.
Okay, we can do that. You and
I don't see that there's any voting there. Usually it's pretty easy to get voting windows.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then in January, it would come back to the board for a second reading. And at that point, if everything looks good, the board would vote to approve it for the following school year, for the upcoming school year. Any questions about that? Okay, and then also just be looking for me sometime this week or from Shauna, an invitation to a meeting sometime in the summer where we'll start our conversations a lot early for the next coming school year. And I would just like to thank you on behalf of Mr. Turner and the board. Thank you for your time working with us and on serving on this committee. It's very helpful. We really appreciate it very much. And with that, we're going to go ahead and adjourn at 6:02 p.m. Everybody have a great evening and a great rest of the week.
Thank you, you guys too.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone. Stay safe.